A father is considered the strong pillar of a family, but what happens when this protector becomes the opposite? Anthony Todt did the unthinkable and claimed the lives of his wife, 3 children, and the family dog. He would go on to live with the corpses for weeks. Why did he do it? We will find out in the details in today's video. Welcome back to Twisted Minds. My name is James, and today I'll take you through the details of this tragic family murder. Anthony Todt lived with his wife and 3 children in the town of Celebration, Florida. The stunning town of Celebration was actually built by the Walt Disney Company and is just a short drive from Disney World, Orlando. The Todt family moved to Celebration in 2017. Anthony and his wife Megan, 42, had been living in Connecticut before they sold their house and started renting one in Celebration. They also bought a condo nearby. The pair had children: Alec, 13, Tyler, 11, and Zoe, 4, as well as a family dog named Breezy. 46-year-old Anthony "Tony" Todt was a physical therapist. He practiced in Connecticut, so he'd often fly back from Florida for work during the week. On the weekends, Todt coached local children to play soccer and was seen as a hands-on dad. His wife Megan was a gentle woman who homeschooled their 3 children. Their youngest child, Zoe, was known to be quite curious and energetic. Tyler and Alec loved playing the piano and reading books. The family was always well-dressed, and the Todts were known to have taken an affluent lifestyle. It makes one think, what could possibly go wrong? From Anthony Todt's profession to where he lived, everything looked quite stable. He looked like any other family man living a good life. Now, that's the thing. Looks can be very deceptive. What is often seen on the outside may not be the reality of what's going on the inside. As is said, if it's too good to be true, it usually is. That was the case with the Todts. All appeared to be merry and celebratory for the family, but Anthony Todt's squeaky clean image wasn't a reality after all. In 2019, it was discovered that Anthony was charging patients for care they had never received. After an investigation, it was found that Anthony was using the excess money to pay for the family home in Celebration and for the family's trips to Disney World. Anthony had taken additional loans from firms in New York City that sued him for failure to pay. Todt initially maintained his innocence with investigators, but eventually relented and admitted to the fraud. It is believed that Megan Todt and the children had no idea about the fraud, as they were not involved in his work. He also had several high-interest loans to keep up with the family's spending, totaling a whopping $200,000. He had told the fraud investigators that Megan had no idea about the debt. Luckily for him, he wasn't arrested and was allowed to go back to his family in Celebration. Because of all the loans and the massive debt he was in, he also struggled to pay rent, and an eviction notice was filed on their rental home. His mind collapsed under all that pressure, and his ability to think rationally disappeared. With so much financial burden and the pressure to keep his family away from knowing any of it, Anthony probably devised a gruesome plan. Despite all of the financial problems haunting his life, in November 2019, he told Megan's family they'd be going on another holiday, so they wouldn't be in touch with them for a while. While Megan's family didn't make much of it, they started getting really worried in around mid-December, as it had been a long time since they had heard from Megan. Megan didn't even call or message or get in touch with her family on Christmas in 2019. In fact, even Todt's family grew worried about the family. The neighbors too messaged Megan about the eviction notice that was put on their house door. Finally, she replied, but with just a few words. Todt's family grew suspicious and worried. They repeatedly asked Osceola Sheriff's deputies to perform a wellness check on the rental home at Reserve Place. At one point, an FBI agent who had been investigating Todt's Connecticut business also grew concerned and asked the Florida Sheriff's Office to locate the physical therapist. "I'm wondering if someone can do a wellness check on my brother and his family," Chrissy Caplet, one of Todt's sisters, said in a December 29, 2020 call to the Osceola County Sheriff's Office, according to court records. Todt's family repeatedly called the police, but to no avail. Eventually, it took federal agents and deputies entering the home to exercise an arrest warrant for his alleged financial crimes on January 13th for police to get in contact with Todt. That's when a horrific discovery was made. When police rang the doorbell, Todt answered the door. He was shaking uncontrollably. When asked about where his wife and kids were, he murmured that his kids were at a sleepover at a friend's place and that his wife was sleeping. His entire demeanor and behavior induced suspicion, and the police entered the home. They could smell a pungent odor and immediately recognized that there was much more going on than just medical insurance fraud. As they ascended the flight of stairs to the second-floor master bedroom, they were horrified to find the dead bodies of Anthony Todt's family. Megan and the couple's 3 innocent children were dead in the house. Their bodies were decomposing and were wrapped up in blankets. This means that the 4 people hadn't died just today or a few days ago, but had been dead for weeks. The police also found that the family dog Breezy was dead too. Except for Zoe, all the victims had stab wounds on their bodies, and on further forensic investigation, it was found that all of them had dangerously high amounts of Benadryl in their bodies. Bottles of Benadryl were found in the house. Anthony Todt had been living in this family home with the corpses of his wife, kids, and dog. Had he killed them? What had happened for this kind of tragedy to strike a family? When questioned by the authorities, Anthony gave a very bizarre story. He claimed that his wife Megan had deteriorating health and had become obsessed with the idea of reincarnation. He said that the couple had made a suicide pact because, according to Megan, an apocalypse was coming.
The world is coming to the end, the apocalyptic end, and that a family is going to be separated and enslaved, and it's better to avoid this, to all go together.
She believed that if they all died, they would burn the family karma and they'd be rewarded with a better afterlife and salvation. He went on to add even more bizarre details. Anthony said that he and Megan had sat down and told the children all about this, about the fact that Anthony and Megan were about to die.
We had sat down and talked with the boys and Zoe just on different things about, death and the way what would happen if mommy died, how would you feel, what happened when daddy died, what would you feel? And because his response was that we don't want you to die, we want to die with you.
Todt also talked about a suicide note that he claimed was written by Megan, that he had later retyped in an effort to honor his family's wishes. Here's what the letter says. We as a family decided this course of action, of salvation for several reasons. The note said that the family is seeing the end of the world prophecy coming true and chooses not to have our family suffer and be subjected to foreseen torture, cataclysmic demise, and continued agony. The note references Todt's back and forth lifestyle between Connecticut and Florida, owing to his work which caused his wife unhappiness. The note read, "The family will no longer be separated, and Tony will be with us always and forever now." The note also said Megan will no longer be in pain from her liver and Lyme disease complications. According to the note, the Todt family made the decision to die together and cited Megan's father's suicide as well as Megan's 2 miscarriages as reasons for the overall depression and the whole family suffered on a daily basis. The middle of the note also said that the family lives in daily constant fear of Tony's father, Robert Todt, who had been convicted of attempting to murder Todt's mother. According to the note, the Todt family is proud of what it has contributed to the world and of the love they share with each other. Our one final wish is that we are kept together, the note read. It also stated a request that the family's ashes, including Breezy's, be distributed either in the ocean or at Harkness Memorial State Park in Waterford, so that we may be with Dad in eternal rest, referencing Megan's dad, Gula. The note ends by asking people close to the Todts to be in peace that we are no longer suffering. The author of the note also apologizes for the anguish and sorrow their actions would cause. But it was a decision we made as a family. Now we will be together forever without pain and suffering, and we will watch over and protect all of you. We love you all. During his confession, Anthony told Osceola County Sheriff's detectives that he had written this suicide note with Megan. He told detectives he printed out the note after the family died. But during his trial later on, Anthony changed his statements and said that Megan alone wrote the note and then gave it to him. The note I found in my pocket after I urinated myself in the garage after one hallucination and drank what I thought was coffee, but I'm pretty sure it was motor oil. I went into the house, stripping, and found the note in my pocket, the note Megan had left, Todt said during his testimony for the trial. I didn't read this note, but from what I recall, it said we did it to the family. And the other thing was where she wanted her ashes. At the bottom of the note, it said, "Tony, I love you forever, please forgive me." Anthony went on to say that he took the note written by his wife Megan out of his urine-soaked pants and retyped it because he wanted the family members that were alive to know that he, his wife, and the kids were a family unit. Todt continued, "And I wanted my wife's wishes known, where she wanted the ashes buried. She wanted to be buried with her father." This note was later presented as evidence during the trial where he denied his own involvement in writing the note and claimed that Megan alone wrote it. Anthony told police that his children said, "We want to die with you," which is why they had gone ahead with their absurd plan. This begs the question, why is Anthony still alive? If it was indeed a suicide pact, he should have overdosed on Benadryl and died too. Why didn't that happen? Perhaps this entire suicide pact story is a lie. When asked about how the killings happened, he said that he smothered his 4-year-old daughter Zoe with a pillow. After that, he stabbed and suffocated his 2 sons. He said that Megan had stabbed herself in the abdomen and drank large amounts of medicine, but when she still didn't die, she had begged Anthony to help her be with her kids. So he suffocated her with a pillow. While Todt put the bodies of his entire family in the bedroom, he didn't really join his family on the other side. When checked, he did have Benadryl in his system, but he said that he'd been unable to stab himself. While his family lay dead and decomposing in the house, Anthony had ventured out once or twice to get alcohol and food. His entire apocalypse and suicide pact story sounded very unconvincing to the authorities, and Anthony was arrested. He was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of animal cruelty. Todt told detectives in detail how he killed his children and Breezy. For some, it will be hard to hear the details of what happened, but here's what he told the authorities. He said he held a pillow over his daughter, Zoe's head, for 10 to 15 minutes. "How long did she kick and scream?" a detective asked. "Only for a couple of minutes," he replied.
So for 10 minutes to 15 minutes, you held a pillow over your daughter's head? Mm-hmm. How long did she kick and scream?
Only for a couple of minutes.
A couple minutes?
Mm-hmm.
When he confessed to the killings in an interview with the detectives, Todt told them that he and his wife believed they bring their children into this world. They should get to decide when they leave. He claimed that he and his wife Megan discussed the whole plan of murdering their children and dying together before committing the horrific crime. He informed the authorities that he stabbed and then he smothered Alec as the boy fought. Megan left midway through this murder, he said.
I stabbed him, and he started kicking. He was trying to get up, and he kept rolling. So I ended up putting there was a pillow there, and I put a pillow in the back of his head so he wouldn't hit me with the back of his head. And I reached around with my hand and held his nose in his mouth. And he kept rolling and kicking and rolling and kicking, and that eventually stopped.
When he was asked how long it took to kill Alec, his eldest son, he responded by saying, "It went quickly. Megan was doing meditations as he killed Tyler downstairs," Todt said. He maintained that they love their children. "We had salvation in mind. he said for the reason for killing them. Todt told detectives interviewing him that he spent the time between when he killed his family and when the bodies were found trying to kill himself with various weapons like knives, zip ties around his neck, Benadryl, etc., but he chickened out. According to the reports presented by the medical examiner, the cause of death for all 4 victims was homicide, violence of unspecified means, and Benadryl toxicity was found in all 4 bodies. According to the crime scene photos, hunting knives were used to stab the family members. The medical examiner could not determine whether the children were suffocated or strangled. Eventually, it was concluded that the stab wounds were likely inflicted after death. Also, it was later revealed that very little Benadryl was used to drug his family. And one of Anthony's sons tried to fight back during the crime. A long scratch was visible on Anthony Todt's neck at the time of his arrest, and his hands too were covered in blisters and cuts. Crime scene investigators also found that Todt's older son was holding rosary beads at the time of his death. There was all of this evidence, but later on, all of a sudden, Anthony changed the entire story about what happened. So now he claimed that it was no longer a suicide pact and an apocalypse is coming situation, but instead that his wife was behind the murders. In a handwritten letter to his father, Robert Todt, he said that he'd returned home to find that Megan killed the children by spiking their pudding pie with Benadryl and then stabbing them. According to him, when he confronted her, Megan stabbed herself in the stomach and died right in front of his eyes. This story is equally bizarre, if not more, than the apocalypse and suicide pact one. Whatever the actual story, the primary and most important fact is that Anthony Todt murdered his family. We will probably never know the reason, but there's some kind of trauma in his background that could have led him to slay his entire family. We can only speculate and try to figure it out. Only one person will forever know the real truth about the why behind this horrific crime: Anthony Todt. There's never going to be any excuse good enough for murder. All we can do is try to figure out why someone's mind worked the way it did to commit such a pathetic crime. Was Anthony having an extramarital affair? Or was it the excessive financial stress that led him to kill his family? Was he afraid that his family would find out about the debt? Or was Anthony Todt following some kind of pattern that he developed from his childhood traumas? Was he trying to avoid being the person his dad was? Let's see what Anthony Todt's childhood looked like. In March 1980, when Anthony was just 4 years old and his family still lived in Pennsylvania, someone barged into the Todt family home and shot Tony's mother. According to a 1981 Philadelphia Inquirer article, Anthony had heard his mother screaming before she was shot. Anthony's father, Robert Todt, who was a formal special education teacher and wrestling coach by profession, was later charged with attempted murder. According to the report, he was accused of hiring an ex-student with learning disabilities, 19-year-old John Chiaramonte, to shoot his wife in 1980. Loretta Todt, Anthony Todt's mother, had luckily survived the attack but lost her left eye. Anthony was 4 at the time. Robert Todt denies any involvement in trying to kill his wife to this day. His stance has remained unchanged since his arrest, and at trial he testified in his own defense. He was convicted in December 1980 and was initially sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison, according to a Philadelphia Inquirer article. In 1984, according to a Philadelphia Daily News article, Robert went before a judge again, and his conviction stood, but his sentence was reduced to 5 to 10 years. Despite his claim of innocence on his criminal conviction, Anthony's father does take responsibility for the extramarital affair, due to which he went out that night when Anthony's mother was shot. According to Robert, his outing that night left his family open to violence and exposed his son to a traumatic experience that could have been a driving factor in what happened with Anthony's family. Tony's sister, Chrissy Caplet, too, felt the same. She talked about a federal investigation on her brother Anthony for an alleged Medicaid fraud scheme, which could land him in prison for a year or 2. She said that Anthony, being a 4-year-old and seeing his dad being taken away, I don't think he wanted the same childhood for his kids. It doesn't excuse it. It certainly doesn't excuse it. "I never thought my brother could do this," Caplet said. "Not in a million years." Tony's father, who gave an interview to The Current, also wondered about the lingering effects of the violence that surrounded the 4-year-old Tony. Even though Robert Bob Todt still maintains his innocence in the 1980 attempted murder of his wife and had little involvement in his children's upbringing, he acknowledges that Tony witnessed someone attempting to kill his mother and said it must have affected Tony deeply. "There's only so much trauma a young kid can take at that point," Bob Todt said. Going by what Anthony Todt's sister and father claimed about his experiences from childhood, there could be some link between Anthony's traumatic experience and murdering his entire family. Anthony Todt, also known as the Killer Disney Dad, had his trial and sentencing in April 2022. The prosecutors had all the evidence ranging from Anthony's confessions and the couple's alleged suicide notes to forensic reports for the 6-day trial. However, Anthony's lawyers had nothing much to defend the case. The overwhelming evidence was enough for the verdict. During the trial, Anthony kept changing his stance. He dismissed his previous confession by saying that it wasn't actually a suicide pact and he wasn't in his right mind when he said that. Instead, he blamed his wife Megan for the children's murders.
Is it true that the multiple times that you spoke to detectives, that you told detectives that you went into Zoe's room, gathered the courage, and you rolled over on top of your daughter until she suffocated? Isn't that what you told law enforcement?
Is this a yes or no question, or do you want the answer?
Yes or no question.
That is what the video, yes, showed you.
And your testimony here today is that Megan did it.
Megan killed Zoe. My testimony today is the fact that Megan killed her kids and killed herself.
His lawyer tried to suppress his earlier confessions and references to his alleged medical insurance fraud. But the confessions were allowed as evidence and were played to the jury at the trial. Despite having confessed previously during interrogation and despite overwhelming evidence against him, Todt pleaded not guilty. He insisted that his second story was true and that Megan was the killer. He even went on to say that his initial confession about the entire suicide pact and apocalypse story was a lie in order to protect his wife. "I was covering for my wife," Anthony told the court. At the trial, he spoke about his wife's struggle with Lyme disease and her depression after a miscarriage. According to the defense, this case still wasn't proved beyond a reasonable doubt. Moreover, they said that Todt had confessed previously while he was drugged, so he wasn't in his senses. He was also suffering from trauma at the time. This obviously didn't make for a strong argument against all the compelling evidence the prosecutors had. The defense also argued that the toxicology reports and the autopsy reports did not really point to a killer. Apparently, the bodies were decomposed far too much to learn much detail about the deaths. During the trial, Todt could often be seen dramatically crying on the stand. According to the prosecution, Anthony sought control over the lives and deaths of his family. They pointed out that Todt's initial taped confession, where he tells horrific details about going into each of his children's rooms and killing them, was consistent with the evidence at the crime scene. The prosecution also raised many valid and logical questions surrounding the case. If what Anthony was saying about his wife Megan murdering the children was true, why hadn't Anthony called the police when he discovered what his wife had done? How had he not been able to overpower his wife when she allegedly began stabbing herself and drinking Benadryl, considering Anthony is a large enough man? The defense, on the other hand, continues to argue that the bodies were too decomposed to determine the exact details of their deaths. So, there's still reasonable doubt surrounding the case and the evidence. According to them, there's not enough proof to say that Anthony Todt is the culprit. There aren't any witnesses either, so they didn't find any solid reason to base the case on the possibility that Anthony had killed his family. However, the prosecution said that Todt had deliberately let his family rot for about 3 weeks to add more doubt to the case. Anthony Todt pleaded not guilty to the charges and chose to testify in his own defense during the trial. He was also the only witness in his defense. He continued to maintain that his wife was responsible for the deaths of their children, not him. Todt said when Megan started to get sick with Lyme disease and depression after she suffered miscarriages, he says she began practicing a Hinduism-based religion with an afterlife component. According to this new story he was telling the court, Anthony got home sometime between December 14th and December 18th of 2019, which is when he said Megan told him she had killed their kids. He describes finding all 3 children dead, then seeing Megan stab herself on the bed. He says he yelled for help out the window but didn't leave to find it. Instead, he began looking for cell phones he says Megan put away. If I left her, I thought she was going to die. I thought, in my decision making, the best chance was for her to tell me where the phones were, Todt said. He said that Megan told him she wanted to be with their kids before she died. He said that led him to several suicide attempts. I couldn't help my wife pass. I felt like a failure. I wasn't there the night my kids died. I felt like a failure. I decided I wanted to be with my family, that I wanted to die, that I deserved to die, Todt said. She had blood on her shirt, and after I said a few uncolored words to her, I went and discovered the kids. I went into the rooms and found them dead. He insinuated there was something in the desserts that she made for the kids, which he couldn't eat. He wanted the court to think that's the reason why he was not dead while the kids had died. When I found out what happened, I puked. I cried. Before Todt took the stand, the defense asked for an acquittal and claimed that a conviction would not be sustainable without reasonable doubt. The state argued that there was ample evidence, which the judge agreed with. Anthony Todt had no way out of the hell he had created for himself. In April 2022, after 6 hours of deliberation, Todt was found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of animal cruelty for killing their pet dog, Breezy.
Verdict as to count 1. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder as charged in the indictment.
He was sentenced shortly afterward. Todt was in disbelief at the verdict and shook his head. I loved my wife. I loved my kids, he said. They were first and foremost in my life. I did not do this. Instead of expressing any kind of remorse, Anthony Todt said that he had put his wife on a pedestal due to her health problems, and had even put on weight because he was so busy putting her first and had no time to look after himself. The judge handed down 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole and added another year for animal cruelty. Anthony's father wasn't pleased with the verdict, nor the way the case was handled. He didn't like the fact that Anthony's confession was taken so seriously, because the confession happened at a time when Anthony Todt was himself shaken. According to Robert, anything Anthony said during that time shouldn't have been considered as the truth. Well, whatever argument the father has, we do know that the man lived with the corpses of his family in his home for weeks before the police came knocking. It only makes one think, how can someone who claims to be innocent live in this scene? Whether the case took into consideration the defense's arguments or not, it will never change the fact that Anthony Todt took away his family members' lives. There was no truth in his apocalypse story, and there was no suicide pact. The reality was that Anthony Todt was an apocalypse in his family's life. He destroyed them and took away their innocent lives before time. Thanks for tuning in to Twisted Minds. That was the case of Anthony Todt, and why don't you go ahead and click on one of the 2 videos on your screen for another one of our videos.